one of the things that I'm doing from the business owner perspective, I'm in a business owners peer group. And so staying in touch with those groups, I've been on a few calls with other business owners, just talking about the realities of what the situation is and what our thoughts are going forward. And I think that staying in touch with other peers helps ground you.
This is the Staying Power Podcast, a show that explores the challenges business owners face as they grow. I'm Brandon Hall.
And I'm Thomas Castelli.
And together, we ask the tough questions to show you that running a business is not for the faint of heart. But if you have staying power, you'll overcome your challenges and achieve lasting success.
Today, we're joined by Mark Goldman CPA. He is a recruiter for accountants in the San Antonio, Texas area. Has been recruiting for over 13 years. We're really excited to bring him on because he had a lot of exciting news to share about how to recruit great talent. And Mark is also the host of the Where Accountants Go podcast, a podcast where he interviews accountants on how they found success in their careers.
Yeah, and recruiting is a service business, right? So we were asking questions around getting traction, starting off and like building this business. And he kind of went into the fact that, it takes a while and you just kind of have to buckle up and fight through it, which is good. You have to have that staying power, right? To actually scale. But the other thing that he kind of touched on too, we started like asking him questions about how do you actually interview, not only for other CPA firms, but also for yourself. How do you interview for your own firm? And he definitely said culture is the number one thing. It's the culture fit at the end of the day. You can train a lot of other things, but you cannot train values. You cannot train culture. So how do you structure questions? How do you ask people interview questions to try to identify that?
Absolutely. And, just to kind of circle back on what he found in the grind in the beginning, in a lot of businesses, and recruiting certainly is a business. Even if you are a recruiter yourself, it's kind of like being a real estate agent in many ways. You are responsible for building your own business. And the first few years are always tough. So you got to stick through it and you ultimately get to where you go if you work hard enough. The last thing we talked about with him, I wanted to point out, was that how podcasting has helped him get in front of his clients and learn more about them, which is, of course, a great way to do business. But without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump right into today's episode so you could hear from Mark himself. Mark, thanks for taking the time to come on the show today. Would you be able to give our listeners a little bit of information on your background?
Sure. It's hard for me to give just a little bit of anything, but I'll do my best. Basically, I am a CPA. Actually, my father was a CPA. That's how I got into the field. But after just a few years, I ended up sort of by accident or by luck, depending on how you look into it, getting into the recruiting field. And I've been a financial recruiter and have a financial recruiting company in San Antonio now. Total years in that business, over 20, probably close to 25.
Got it. Quickly, I know as a CPA, what made you make that transition from being in the world of accounting to go to recruiting?
Sure. No, actually, it's sort of interesting. Frankly, if I weren't doing this, I'd probably still be a tax accountant because I really liked tax. But I was working in my father's practice. He was a CPA, and I wanted to get married. I'm married to my high school sweetheart. I wanted to, go see the bigger world. Wanted to see if I could make a little more money at the time. I went out looking for a job, and after a short search, I ended up in a recruiter's office talking to them about possibilities. And actually, they sent me on one interview. That didn't work out. And like a month later, they called me and said, "Hey, would you consider working here?" I think they couldn't place me. And so they figured, well, they got to do something. So they ended up hiring me. And I took a chance. And frankly, that first year was difficult. It's doing recruiting is much different than doing accounting, but it ended up working out. And I'm very blessed because of it.
Now, I was about to say from the talks that so Tom did a short stint at a recruiting firm. And from the talks that I've had with him, I know that you just said you were looking for some more stability, it seems like, to get married. And from talks I've had with Tom, I think that's like the exact opposite of first year in recruiting, right?
Sometimes it's fortunate not to know things. So when I first got into recruiting, I remember resigning from the job I was in and telling them what I was going to do. And they're like, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I said, I don't know. I know we had lunch in this club upstairs. I think I'm going to be taking a lot of people to lunch and getting to know them. I had absolutely no idea what the industry was really like. I was in for a cold wake-up call, honestly, but it worked out. It worked out.
No, for sure. I can relate to your story there. It is tough to make it in the recruiting business. So at this point, you made it. You've had your own business, MGR Accounting Recruiters, for about 13 years or so. What made you decide to start your own business and go out and create your own recruiting firm?
Actually, and I'll take you back a little bit, before that. So I get into the recruiting world, and honestly, the first year was very difficult. But after that, I was entering at a time when the economy was really starting to take off. So after that first, adjustment period, it went very well, and I got promoted a few times. And I decided to leave that organization, went to another one, and eventually ended up being partners at a different company, and that worked out very well. Here's a little business education for everybody, I guess. I was a minority partner at another firm, and I was very young. And honestly, I don't think I really understood what the position of a minority partner is. I tended to think of it as a regular partner, and that caused some issues. So we ended up parting ways, and I got out of the industry for 3 years. First year was great, and then I found myself just missing the business. I missed helping people with their careers. We didn't have kids at the time, my wife and I, and so I'd work during the week, and then on the weekends, I'd be, designing databases that I would need if I owned a recruiting company, and designing systems that I would need, and forms and stuff like that. And eventually it's like, I had everything I need to go. I either need to put up or shut up. I need to either stop thinking about this and move on with life, or prove if I could do it or not. And so after about 3 years out of the business, I decided to come back, and I started MGR Accounting Recruiters. Literally from, are y'all familiar with executive suites? Sort of like the co-working space of yesteryear?
Not particularly.
Okay, so executive suites are basically where one company rents a lot of space in a building, and then they subdivide it into small offices. So it's like co-working space, but everybody has a private office. So basically, I rented one of these little private offices, about 140 square feet. I had a laptop, a desk, 2 chairs, and I was smart enough to get a window so I wouldn't get too depressed. And I just started making calls. And thank goodness it worked out. It was a good economy at the time, and it worked out.
Nice. You just started out as a solo practitioner, or did you have employees when you first started at the very beginning? Can you just kind of walk us through how it started?
Sure. Yeah, no problem. Actually, no employees at all. Starting from that office space, literally on New Year's Day, I put together furniture. January 2nd, 2007, I started calling people I knew. I was fortunate, and I got my first search within just a couple days. Ended up making first or completing the search. We call it making a placement, as you're familiar with, within the first month. And then it went on rolling from there. I hired my first employee with MGR Accounting Recruiters. Basically, after 8 or 9 months, I had the first individual come in, hired the second early the following year, so maybe 15, 16 months into it, and then it just grew from there. The industry is very competitive, as you alluded to earlier, but I was fortunate, and I think with my own accounting background, and I was blessed that people remembered me from doing it before, that I was able to make it work.
And how many employees do you have today?
Actually, there are 6 of us now in the office, and then we do a variety of other things as well within the space of serving the accounting community. So I have several contractors. For instance, I have a new branch, which COVID-19 is causing an issue with this, but I have a new branch where we do training as well. So we not only help people get jobs and help employers find the people they're looking for, we also help employers develop people and help individuals get the skills they need. We have a division called MGR Training also, where we teach Excel, we teach leadership, communication. We're licensed to provide CE in Texas. So it's all live classroom stuff. So that COVID-19 has put a little damper on that for the moment, but we use a lot of contractors to run that as well.
Okay. How many contractors do you typically use?
Basically, they're the instructors. Right now we probably have about a dozen that are teaching various classes for us.
So it's a pretty big, 6 employees, a dozen contractors. That's a pretty large team, even if they're only part-time or working one-off projects or engagements. How do you hold everybody accountable?
I think Wow. That's a great question. That wasn't on the list that you guys sent me. Just joking.
Accountability is a big thing in businesses. We're very interested in it.
Accountability. I think hiring well in the first place, and that's something that it's taken me a few years to learn. This is interesting. So any day of the week, I can help an employer hire a good accountant, and our team, we can do that. That's something that comes second nature to us. When we're hiring internally, hiring somebody that's working in the recruiting field, that's an entirely different skill set and talent set. So it took a few years for me to nail down what really worked for us, but that's really what it comes down to is hiring well in the first place. And then I think the accountability comes a little easier.
Okay, so now this is getting super interesting. So the recruiters are really good at hiring for others, but what I'm kind of sensing here is that you struggled with hiring your own employees, which is totally reasonable. I've struggled with it too. I guess what I'm asking is, what have you found works for you with your own hiring process? How do you make sure that you're hiring somebody that's going to be a good fit for your organization and going to work the way that you want them to work?
Two things. I saw a picture recently to sort of illustrate this, where it was two swimmers. It was from the Olympics, and the guy in the front, it's got common swimming form. He's going forward. You can tell he's working really hard at it. And the guy right behind him, his arms are out of the water and he's looking at the other guy that's ahead. And the caption was, winners focus on finishing, losers focus on winners. And that helps me remember in the beginning when I started the company, and I think a lot of business owners do this, you tend to do things, you think you're doing things the way you think they should be done. And there is some of that. But in reality, a lot of us, what we do is we copy what other people are doing. And from a hiring standpoint, for instance, I worked for a company in the past that said, you never hire a recruiter that says they want to help people, because if they want to help people, well, they're not really focused on the business side of it. And that was drilled into my head for many years. And honestly, I have found that's totally the opposite within my company. And it took a few years for me to determine what the hiring profile is. Now, literally, I have a list of characteristics that we look for in internal staff. And one of them is a genuine caring for people. I found that trying to copy what others do to be successful in the marketplace really doesn't work for me. We are unique, and our hiring profile is unique. So that took me a few years to recognize, but I think that's an answer to your question, how we've had to work hiring internally.
So when you approach hiring, are there any non-starters for you? Like, let's say you get the candidate's application, they look great, they show up. What immediately, automatically know that they're a bad fit?
Well, just to clarify, are we? I don't know.
For your business first, and then we'll talk to all the accountants. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. For my business, and actually this would probably be for accounting too, I guess, lack of attention to detail, because in the placement business, I remember a trainer likening it to putting stuff on a conveyor belt and making sure that the stuff doesn't fall off all the way till the end. And that's what we do a lot of times. There's making the match, but then there's working through the entire hiring process with both sides to make sure that both sides end up with an acceptable result on the end. And so if an individual comes in and their attention to detail, their attention to the small stuff is lacking, that's a bad indicator. For instance, this sounds so basic, but they come in late and they don't say anything about it. They come in and they make an excuse for how they're dressed. Because if you have to make an excuse for how you're dressed, well, then maybe you should have thought about it, in the beginning.
And just so that everybody is aware, I'm wearing a T-shirt right now, and Mark Mark is very well dressed for this interview, so I would not get hired at Mark's firm. No, that's good. What about for accountants? Like if you're going to place somebody with an accountant, what are some things that you're looking for that, or maybe that accounting firms should be looking for, or is it just that attention to detail?
Well, first of all, we do placements for accounting firms, and then we also do probably more in industry. Our share of the market for accounting firms where we are is high, but obviously there's a whole lot more companies in industry that hire accountants. And so we have a large number of clients in industry as well. Really, it depends on the job. And I'm not, because seriously, you can have one individual come in and, to your point, they're wearing a t-shirt and they're smart. They can talk to you about, cost accounting, something in the industrial side of things. And you just know that individual would be excellent for a CFO or controller or, senior accountant position at one of your construction clients or manufacturing clients, and you can have an individual come in and to your point, they're dressed like I am at the moment, the white shirt and tie, and super smart. And you could just tell from talking to them that there's no way maybe, that they would fit in at that same client. So really, it's a case-by-case basis. And one of my core beliefs is that for almost every job, there's someone out there that would want that job and would consider it to be a good move. For almost every candidate as well, there is a job somewhere out there. The trick is making the match well.
Is culture fit the most important thing when hiring?
Yes, by far. It's interesting because the way hiring is set up, how do you get hired? Well, the first thing you do is you ask for resumes and you look at a resume. Well, a resume doesn't tell you anything about culture, but that's the way the hiring processes have been set up. And frankly, that's where I think a firm like ours can bring a lot of value, is that we're determining personality and culture fit on the front end. And then from there, moving down into skills and making sure all that matches. But by far, yes.
Yeah. You know what it was? And that kind of aligns with my experience when I was in recruiting as well. For, the public accounting industry, the culture, from my experience, wasn't necessarily a huge deal. It was more or less, can this person operate in a small accounting firm or a mid-sized accounting firm or a big four accounting firm? If they came from a different environment, that was primarily the concern. When I was doing some recruiting for startup companies, that culture was key. Culture was absolutely like the biggest thing. So definitely have to agree with that there. Kind of shifting gears just a little bit, when it came to kind of building out the various components of the business, I know that recruiting is typically sales. It's a very sales heavy, sales driven business. Were there any challenges you had when building out the sales component of the business, perhaps maybe the scripts that you were using to speak to candidates or clients or something along those lines?
I had been doing it for a while at that point, and also we were in a decent, growth market, and we have been for a while. Honestly, I can't say that I had difficulty in that area. When the market is growing, the key is having and knowing where to find, good people, where to find people that are looking for a possible change and have, a good background to be able to market. And so we grew a lot by candidate marketing. And while we're on this topic, actually, we've talked a lot about the matching side, and you're talking about the sales standpoint. When we hire people internally, like I mentioned, we try to find people that genuinely care about other individuals. I try to look for things in their background that are evidence of that. I feel like the employment counselor side is just as much a part of being a recruiter, because you can do a great job matching up a skill set and even a personality type to what the employer is looking for. But if you don't pay equal attention to what the candidate is looking for in their career, then what you've done is you set up a very short-term placement. Because, the person may get hired, maybe they're lured over by certain aspects of the job, maybe it's money. But ultimately, if 3 or 6 months down the road, they're not happy at the organization because it doesn't meet their needs, from some standpoint, then you've set yourself up for two unhappy people, unhappy client and unhappy candidate. So we spend a lot of time on the front end trying to figure out what's the right fit for the candidate. What are you really looking for? In fact, if you were interviewing with me, Brandon, one of the first things, and Thomas, one of the first things that I would ask is, so tell me, what are you looking for in an employer? What are you looking for in a job? I get into that far before I ever start to touch skill set, because the answer to those questions really is going to qualify where we go from here.
And this is assuming I show up in a suit and tie.
Well, yeah.
Good stuff.
I am so just kidding. By the way, we interview a lot of individuals that look really sharp in a polo, Yeah. I don't know what's on your t-shirt.
I have never, a suit and tie is kind of long. I tried to put one on for a wedding a couple months ago, and it was not pretty. So, yeah, no, that's good. Okay, so kind of along these lines, though. So you find somebody, the employer maybe isn't necessarily that great of a fit. What's a top reason that after placement, the relationship ends up not working out?
Well, actually, I cover this in, I've written 2 books, and I cover this in the first book. It's called 49 Tips for a Successful Accounting Career. And I think just in general, the number one reason, and this is out, you'll read this other places as well. The number one reason for a job not working out is a lack of a quality relationship with the supervisor. So I'd say just in general, when a position isn't working out well, whether it's somebody we placed or just in the general marketplace, it's a lacking somewhere in that relationship with the individual's direct supervisor. Because people hire people that they like and believe can do the job, and they keep people that they like working with. And so if there's something lacking there, if it becomes awkward, then that's where you see, things not work out. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I can attest to that too. And I think at the end of the day, you can certainly structure your business in a way, and I have fallen, I guess, victim to this in my earlier stages. You can structure your business in a way where you can certainly turn off people that end up working for you just based on the decisions and the moves that you make. But what I have come to find is more often than not, people will leave managers. So exactly your point, they're going to leave managers more so than the business itself. And that relationship, if you have a really strong relationship, even if the business stinks, if that manager relationship's really strong, then they might actually end up staying for a lot longer than they would have otherwise. So that's good. So let's switch gears back to your business. What was a challenge that almost made you quit, and how did you overcome it?
Actually, I've been through, it's funny, we're recording this during the whole COVID-19 situation, and I've been under shelter at home now for about a week. And that's a whole nother story. I found that I like working from home a little bit, but it's a whole nother story topic for later. I've been
shed like I have. That's the key.
There you go. I just, in the employment industry, recessionary times are difficult, and those thoughts always go through your mind. And so I've been through several of those in my career. In fact, to some extent, that's sort of what got me into recruiting in the first place. I went through the 9/11 situation. I went through the 2008, financial institutions failures, and now here we are again. So really those times, and I find that there's probably some general business sense in here as well. I find that going back to the basics and cutting out all the noise and the fringes that you let come into your business when things are going well. It's easy to spend a little of your time here and a little of your time there, a little money here, a little money there when things are going well because everything's plentiful. When it gets a little tighter, then I find that going back to basics, going back to what your core mission is and just executing on that has helped me get through those recessionary times, which those are the most challenging. Luckily, accounting employment is sort of a lagging indicator. It usually takes a little while to trickle down in accounting employment. So we usually have some advance warning like we do now. But those have been the difficult times.
And could you give us an example of what get back to your basics means? Like what actions do you take or have you taken in the past to kind of cut out the noise, get back to the root of what you're doing and keep marching forward?
Really just in the recruiting business, it's staying in touch with the people in the profession. So staying in touch with clients, staying in touch with candidates, making sure that we understand what their needs are and what their dreams are, because actually one of the benefits of using a recruiting firm from a candidate standpoint is there really is a hidden job market out there. There really are positions that are not advertised that sort of just exist in the hiring manager's mind. If I had someone like this, I would hire them to do this. And it's not necessarily a requisition in the HR department. It's not necessarily advertised. They may not have even verbalized it, but staying in touch so we know about those opportunities, that's sort of one of the basics. And then knowing who would match up for that.
So when you see a recessionary environment and you know that pain is coming because you're in the business of human capital, how does that affect your mentality? Like, how do you stay sane seeing these dips coming? And what do? You said kind of block out some of the noise, which is a great step. What are some other things that you do just to kind of make sure that you are marching down that right path and stay mentally positive?
Oh, yeah, I'm not going to lie. During what we're going through right now, there are days where I feel like I'm on the battlefield and we're going to win this thing, and it's, going to be victorious and we're making a lot of progress and things are going well. And then there are other days when, you start to look around and think, I haven't seen any of my team in a few days and stuff like that. And it gets a little depressing. One of the things that I'm doing from the business owner perspective, I'm in a business owners peer group, the alternative board tab, and there are several out there. We have one of my key individuals in Vistage as well. And so staying in touch with those groups, I've been on a few calls with other business owners, just talking about the realities of what the situation is and what our thoughts are going forward. And I think that staying in touch with other peers helps ground you. That's what's helping me keep a good perspective, honestly, at the moment.
Yeah, peer groups are key. We've talked to other CEOs who say, I turned the news off and I've just developed a plan and I'm just going to execute my plan. And that's how I stay sane. But they typically build the plan with peer groups, right? So all these other CEOs that are also going through the exact same thing. And it's important to find that sort of support, because I think that as a business owner, you're not really going to find solid support with people that don't understand what you're going through. And that means you're not going to find support with your family. You're not going to find, you'll find support with your family, right? But not like the hardcore support that you're kind of, can you resonate with my situation type of support. You're just not going to find that with family. You're not going to find that with your employees. You're really only going to find that with other people who are literally experiencing the dips that you're now going through, and they're all trying to work together to figure it out. So peer groups have been great for me. I'm involved in several. I have several business coaches, and I love that you brought that up. I also like that you were kind of talking about, I feel like I'm on the battlefield sometimes, and that reminded me of a tweet that Mark Cuban tweeted out on March 18th, right in the middle of the coronavirus stuff. And he said, "Reminder to bosses, your employees are just as freaked out and concerned about themselves, family, and friends as you are." And then he said, "Reminder to employees, your bosses are just as freaked out and concerned about themselves, family, and friends as you are." This is new to all of us. We're all in it together. And I thought that was a really cool perspective, because I think that a lot of times the business owners tend to get the short end of the stick with any sort of media coverage. And we tend to be the overarching bad guys. But at the end of the day, we're just trying to survive. And we're trying to keep a business afloat. And anytime that you enter any sort of down period, whether it's globally or just in your industry, it can be really tough to navigate. But it's important to just kind of be transparent and try to get ahead of it and stick to the plan. So with each one of these downturns, how does it change the look and feel of your business? Do you operate differently coming out of it, or do you kind of just maintain status quo?
Coming out of the downturn, you mean as the economy picks back up? Is that what you're...
Yeah. So you go through the down period, and maybe it's a recession, maybe it's something different. But you go through this down period, and then as you're coming back out of it, does your business change at all? Do you change the way that you operate, the way that you hire, the way that you talk to people?
From an operational standpoint, one of the things that happens in the employment business, and I'm sure you can relate to this, guys, in terms of accounting firm hiring, when times are tighter and we're not there yet in the accounting market, or I'm not seeing layoffs and stuff like that. Actually, I'm seeing organizations hold tight with their accounting teams. But if we get to that point where there are more available people in the marketplace, one of the things that happens in employment is, if we're being asked to find somebody with 3 or 4 years public accounting tax experience and a CPA, well, then in a market where there are more people available, well, then we darn well better find somebody that has 3 or 4 years of tax experience and a CPA for that requirement. Now, in the time that we've been in recently, frankly, at least in the area of the country I'm in, talent was very tight. There are not enough CPAs for the demand. And then public accounting is always a tight market. So for that exact same search, one of the things we would do different operationally is, you said 3 or 4 years and a CPA and tax. I mean, if we had somebody with 2 years tax, we'd still see if you're interested, CPA or not. If we said somebody 5 or 6 years, we'd see if you're interested, so the search parameters sort of change, depending on what the marketplace is like. I like to think, and I really do believe, I think my team would back us up on this. We don't treat people any differently, but from an operational standpoint, how exact we need to be changes, for the employers.
It's funny because, all this talk about recruiting and whatnot is bringing me back to my days, right? Bringing me back to the days that I was in recruiting. And one of the biggest challenges, and this isn't necessarily on a downturn, but one of the biggest challenges I've found, because I worked in New York City in recruiting where it was extremely competitive. The market was extremely tight, to your point. Accountants hated hearing from recruiters. You were like the bad guy. People would hang up on you. They would tell you they'd tell you much worse things than that. And one of the things I found, which is hard to do, is building that trust, building that trust with a candidate that you have their best interests in mind, that you know what you're doing and you're not just out for a quick buck, right? And one of the things I found really interesting about what you're doing is you have a podcast, Where Accountants Go podcast. And I just kind of wanted to see how that has helped you grow your business and build trust with candidates and your audience in general.
I think from a positioning standpoint, it's made a difference because, there's certainly other accounting podcasts out there. There are very few ongoing accounting career podcasts at the moment. And I probably shouldn't have let out that secret, I guess. But frankly, it's been over 3 years now. I've just recorded, it hasn't been released yet, but like episode number 170. And so just having staying power in the marketplace from that standpoint is beneficial. And, the positioning, I think has been, or it's helped in positioning. The other thing is I'm very fortunate with guests. It's really rare that if I approach somebody about coming on the show that they turn me down. I did what most people do in the early days. I get a few people I sort of know, that'll say yes. But then after you get rolling, I haven't been turned down much. And I've had some incredible guests on the show. If you think about it, if I called some of these individuals, CEO of utility company here in San Antonio, chief accounting officer for one of the biggest brand names in this area, in the general marketplace, managing partners of top 100 firms. If I called them, I said, "Hi, my name's Mark Goldman. Hey, can I talk to you for an hour just on the phone?" They'd be polite. They'd say, "Yeah, let me see if I can work it in." But I'd be lucky if I heard back from any of them, right? But with a podcast, I'm able to get in touch with that person. And effectively, I'm saying, "Hey, can I talk to you for an hour? We're just going to record it. And this is going to benefit, 1,000+ people. Who knows how many over the lifetime of the podcast." And I get to spend that much time with these people. And that benefits me greatly from a learning standpoint because it's broadening my knowledge outside of just the clients we deal with and my geographical area. I've had a couple guests from Australia not long ago, probably going to have one from the UK soon here. And then also, many of the states here in the US. So I'm learning a lot, honestly. And that's been beneficial, I think, for my own career or my own work. But then also, I think that benefits our candidates and our employers because I know more about how other firms are handling things.
Yeah, so Tom and I run the Real Estate CPA podcast, and it's for real estate investors who want to learn about some different tax things that they could potentially do. And we interview a bunch of real estate investors out there. And we have a very similar experience to you in that it has given us the staying power in the real estate industry to, it's just kind of helped our brand and a lot of people know about it. But I'm curious, so what we have found with that podcast is one, consistency is absolutely a must. If you're going to do a podcast, you have to be consistent. It doesn't matter if it's going to be once a year. If you're going to run one podcast episode a year, you have to be consistent, right? Once a week, once a day, once a month, whatever it is for you. But two, we have found that people listen to quite a few of those episodes before they ever contact us. And then when they contact us, they've already built a relationship with us, which is interesting. Like we've never talked to them before. but they know our voice, they know about us, they know what we do, they like us, they like our personalities, and they're just ready to sign. So they've already invested all this time. You kind of outsource your relationship building. They invest all this time into listening to your voice and hearing you. And then they go, man, I really trust this Mark guy. He's talked a lot about the things that I'm curious about. I'm just going to give him a call and let's just do it. Have you found that to be a similar experience?
Yeah, on both standpoints. First of all, consistency is extremely important, with the exception of some holiday weeks that sometimes I choose to take off, or sometimes I don't want to release a guest episode during a holiday week. With the exception of those, we've had a show every week since October, 2016 when I started. I started with just 3 shows, released them, and then got on the ball and recorded some others. So yeah, consistency is key. You've probably heard this term, pod fading. They even have something they call it in the podcast world, pod fading, where you start out consistent and then maybe you have a weekly show, and then pretty soon you're doing every 2 weeks, and pretty soon you're doing a month, and pretty soon people are unsubscribing from your show because they don't know when you're coming back. And I keep that in the back of my mind. I don't want to be one of those. Eventually, someday it's going to happen, of course. It doesn't go on forever, but yeah, I don't want to be one of those pod fading individuals.
That's great. That's great. So, would you be able to just give us 3 tips, your top 3 career tips for accountants, the tips that you have for their career and how they can grow and continue to evolve?
Yeah, I knew this question was going to come up. Y'all hinted at it. And then also, I work in the employment space, so it's sort of normal. I'm going to answer it 2 ways. First of all, from the situation we're in right now, okay, the COVID-19, coronavirus time, a lot of uncertainty going forward. Maybe it'll get over sooner than we think, maybe not. I think particularly for those individuals that went to remote work, that didn't work remotely, and then also even for those that were already remote, that maybe they're working for people that weren't remote, I think it's very important that we're valuable. As an accountant, you need to be valuable to your employer. What that means right now is you need to make sure that they know what you're doing. There are a lot of times accounting goes so smoothly that the employer really doesn't have a good understanding of what the person's doing on a daily basis. They just sort of take it for granted that it's going smoothly. And I think during a time like this, if a company is down the road going to look at places to cut costs, it's really important that they understand what you do on a daily basis. And if there is anything that you can do to provide extra value, that's very important. Just in the general sense, I calculated one time I had done over 10,000 interviews in my career, and that was several years ago. So I've interviewed a lot of people. Obviously, a subset of that is controllers and CFOs. The most successful individuals, and this would apply to public accounting, I guess, too, the most successful accountants, the one that continues to move up and generally the happiest, are the ones that don't just learn about accounting, but they learn about business operations as well. And they really understand how the organization they work for makes money. They don't just account for it. They understand how, actually more specifically, how the organization makes profit. And I think we as accountants, the more we care about how our organization makes a profit, how it continues to do well, and the more we learn about that, the more valuable we become. And frankly, usually the happier you are in what you're doing as well. So that would be my other tip, just in general, is learn as much as you can about the organizational processes and how that company makes money, not just how to account for it.
Just kind of going above and beyond, becoming more than just an accountant. That's pretty much the top 2 tips. Maybe is providing extra value by going above and beyond, and then just continuing to learn about the organization as much as you can, so that you ultimately become more valuable than just someone in an accounting position.
Yeah, we throw around this term trusted advisor quite a bit these days, and it's true, but if you want to ask yourself a hard question, in public accounting or in industry, ask yourself, am I really being an advisor? In what ways have I been an advisor recently? And I think that's a good way to tell if you're providing value or not.
Yeah, and what both of you are saying makes 100% sense. As a business owner, the people in my organization that have risen and have thrived are the people that have been very interested and proactive in learning about parts of the business that does not have to do with tax advisory, or accounting. It's learn about marketing, learn about the process of onboarding a lead and then getting the work out the door, right? And the process is different than actually doing the work. It's the architecture, and that type of person is a lot harder to say, I don't really want them on my team anymore, especially, we are filming this right in the middle of COVID. And it's a lot harder to get rid of somebody that has provided all of that additional value, or has the potential to provide that additional value outside of just crunching numbers and entering things in the tax returns. So it's good to hear you say that. And I can just attest to it as a business owner myself.
Definitely.
We asked this question on the Real Estate CPA podcast too, and it's a great question, especially during COVID-19. What is the number one piece of technology or software that your business could not operate without?
I don't know that there's a lot of value in this overall for general businesses, but in staffing, because we do permanent placement and we also do temporary staffing. It's important to have an integrated system where you have a CRM and then also applicant tracking. And so really that combination software that we use, it would be very difficult to be organized without it. I did when I started the practice, I had 2 separate systems, but very quickly you outgrow that. And we would have a hard time we use a company out of Arizona. We'd have a hard time without some kind of system like that.
No, absolutely. I remember, again, taking back to my recruiting experience, we had an ATS and it was a phenomenal system. It was really easy to keep track of all your candidates, all your clients, keep track of all the information you had on them. It was phenomenal. And we used it was called Encore. I don't know if it's an industry type of software or not, but it was excellent. And I could definitely agree that if you're running a recruiting business without that ATS, it's going to be very difficult to stay organized and stay on top of things. So you can definitely relate there for sure.
And I can't believe I didn't think of this before, but probably the most basic thing is email, right? Without email, things would be very difficult.
Yeah. Do you find yourself using like Zoom meetings like this a lot to conduct interviews, or Skype or something along those lines? Or is it all primarily like face-to-face?
So 2 answers to that. Well, we are now. We weren't before. Before this, though, most of our placement was done, a large majority was done with local candidates and all with local companies. I mean, we did have individuals coming in from out of town. And in those cases, there was, a place for a Zoom interview or FaceTime or what have you, just to get to know them a little bit. But now, obviously, we've moved to using Zoom and some other, primarily Zoom, frankly. Something we've had to adjust to really quick because we're more of the in-person kind of recruiting firm. So, yeah. This gets back to what I was talking about earlier about really figuring out what the candidates' needs are and their motivations. And I found that it's difficult to really get a handle on that unless you can spend some quality time with the candidate. So under normal circumstances, we prefer to meet them somewhere or have them come in the office to get to know them.
And do you think that, I know in my experience interviewing on Zoom, you don't get a whole lot of the body language cues that you'd normally otherwise get. Do you think that kind of factors in, or what are some of the challenges that you're experiencing using Zoom to interview candidates versus in person?
Actually, it's similar, or one of the weaknesses is similar to what you have on the phone. So if you and I are having a conversation and we run out of things to talk about temporarily, or maybe I don't have an immediate question to ask you on the phone or on Zoom, very quickly you can jump to, well, hey, thank you for your time. And one side or the other is going to feel like, well, it's time to naturally end this, right? But when you're meeting in person, it's different. When you're meeting in person, you're both sitting there. Yes, you can read, facial expression more and body language. But then also to end the conversation, one of you has to physically get up and leave. And even that act takes some time, and getting out of the office takes some time. And so I think when you're having an in-person conversation, it's just naturally easier to get deeper, which is very important in what we do.
I could see exactly where you're coming from that, and in many ways that I would have to agree. But what is the best way for our listeners to learn more about you and MGR Accounting Recruiters?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for asking. I'd love for your listeners to check out our podcast. It's called Where Accountants Go. You can find it through any podcast app, of course, and it's an accounting careers podcast. So I interview individuals. The shows are a little long, but it takes time to get deep. The shows generally run 35 to 45 minutes. And like I said, we've been going for 3.5 years. So look that up or online at mgrar.com. mgrar.com, like My Great Recruiter, accountingrecruiters.com.
Guys, so we're going to go ahead and link that up in the show notes for everybody who's listening there who wants to check that out. And, it's been a pleasure having the conversation today. We really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show, especially during the COVID-19 crisis, to come and chat about us. I think we learned a little bit more about the hiring process for accountants, and it was great to hear about your success with the podcast and everything. So thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you very much. I get to talk about careers a lot, but I don't get to talk about my own journey very much. So I really appreciate the opportunity.
Anytime.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, leave us a review on iTunes and share the show with other business owners who may be facing their own growth challenges. And if you own a professional services firm, consider joining our private community. The Staying Power Collective is a community where owners of accounting, law, and consulting firms discuss best practices for running and growing virtual businesses. You'll get access to our Slack group, and you'll have a Zoom meeting once a month with a small group of other firm owners. To apply for the group, head on over to www.stayingpowercollective.com and fill out the brief form. And if you have suggestions for future topics or guests, or if you have general questions or feedback, send us an email at contact@stayingpowercollective.com. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great rest of your week.